Hello everyone friends. Sit back, pour yourself a cup of tea or something more powerful. While the whole world is going crazy, we're going to look into the archives, which historians usually keep quiet about. Because the reality there looks like a script written by a very drunk genius. Life is generally the most audacious playwright, and today we will see this once again. Today you will learn 1. Why the French built a second Paris in the forest. 2. How the American Army parachuted beavers. 3. How 1 minute's distraction turned a piece of paper into $1.5 million. Well, let's go figure out how it really was. If you like stories in this format, support this cycle with a like and write in the comments from which city you are watching us. It helps a lot to promote our community. Story number 1. Lines in the sand that rewrote world trade. Imagine America in the late 40s. The golden era of jazz has already died down. The country is being built, cities are growing by leaps and bounds. Something completely unthinkable appears. For past generations, huge grocery stores are what we would now call supermarkets. But there was one giant queue problem. They were just endless. Cashiers had to manually drive in the price of each carton of milk, each can of beans, and each bar of soap. Customers threw full carts right in the middle of the hall and walked away, because no one wanted to stand at the checkout for an hour. Shopkeepers were tearing their hair out. And in the fall of 1948, the owner of a local grocery chain came to the Institute of Technology in despair. He literally begged the dean, "Come up with something. We need a system that will read prices by itself." The dean just spread his hands. Impossible. But this conversation was overheard by a young graduate student named Bernard Silver. He told this to his friend, 27-year-old teacher Joseph Woodland. And you know what? Joseph caught fire. He was obsessed with this idea. First, they tried using mauve ink. It would seem to be a great idea. You draw invisible patterns on the product. You highlight it at the checkout. But it's a failure. A complete failure. Ink quickly. And they also cost so much that it would be cheaper to hire 10 cashiers for each customer. Many would have given up, but Joseph was of a different breed. He makes a completely crazy decision. Quits a prestigious job with a teacher, packs a suitcase, and leaves for Florida in a small course. His grandfather's apartment. He needed a place where no one would interfere with his thinking. Months pass. And then one winter morning Joseph is sitting on a yarn in Miami. The sun is warming, the waves are noisy. He thinks about Morse code, which he learned in his youth when he was a Boy Scout. Ingenious and simple. But how do you get the machine to read the dots and dashes on a round can of tomato soup, which the cashier turns in his hands? He just sat on the beach, looked at the ocean, put his hand on the wet sand. 4 fingers. He mechanically drew them across the sand to himself. Silence. Pause. A blow. Joseph looked at the footprints left behind. 4 furrows. And what if you pull the dots and dashes of Morse code into long lines? Thick and thin. It doesn't matter how you turn the jar, if the lines go from top to bottom, the scanner will still see them. Right there on the beach, he drew the first ever barcode in the sand with ordinary fingers. He patented this idea in 1952. It would seem that here it is, a triumph, millions of dollars, fame, the solution to all the world's problems with queues. Although no, wait, it wasn't quite that simple. More precisely, not at all. The idea was brilliant, but the technology of that time was godlessly lagging behind Woodland's thoughts. In order for the machine to see the drawn lines, a very powerful light was needed. Joseph built the first prototype of the scanner using a lamp from a giant 500-watt movie projector. This thing was the size of a huge desk. She was working. The machine did read the lines, but there was one small detail. The lamp was heated so much that the paper with the code flashed. A great invention, you must agree. It burned your purchases even before you had time to get your wallet. The years passed. Joseph sold his patent to a technology company for just $15,000. Ridiculous money for an idea that will soon turn the planet around. He accepted that he was ahead of his time. But the world did not stand still. Decades later, scientists invented lasers with a thin, cold, incredibly precise beam of light. And someone in the laboratories of a large corporation remembered Joseph's old patent. Summer, June 26, 1974. A small grocery store in Ohio. A man named Clyde Dawson approaches the cash register. The cashier, a little nervous, takes a pack of fruit-flavored chewing gum from his basket. She brings it up to the glass window, from which a red ray shoots out. There is a short, unlike anything else sound. Pip. That's it. This tiny and funny electronic sound was the beginning of a whole new era, of the era that began with 4 fingers held on the wet sand on the beach. Joseph Woodland lived to see sit-in, and saw with his own eyes how his sand drawing was printed on every product in every store on the planet. Amazing, isn't it? Sometimes the greatest revelations do not come within the walls of expensive laboratories, but when a person simply picks through the sand, looking at the ocean waves. But this is only one facet of human ingenuity. Sometimes, in order to achieve the impossible, people had to deceive not only the laws of physics, but also entire states. We will talk about one such brilliant ironic deception later. Friends, we devote a lot of time to fact-checking. We leave all the primary sources in the description. But if you suddenly notice a mistake in the story, let me know in the comments. We will double-check the facts, and in the next issue, we will definitely correct it by noting your comment. Now we continue. Story number 2. The man who built a fake Paris and hid the real city. Imagine Paris in 1917. Europe is gripped by the First World War. In the sky, that most beautiful sky over Siena, where once only balloons and birds flew, now that Zeppelins and the first heavy bombers of Goth are circling. They arrive at night. They are guided, of course, not by navigators. There were no signs of them then. German pilots looked down, searching in the darkness for the bends of the River Seine and the bright lights of the French capital. Paris, even darkened, still lit up, hiding a huge metropolis pulsating with life with its boulevards, train stations and squares, turned out to be an impossible task. And that's where the story begins, similar to the scenery for a crazy movie. Panic reigns in the offices of the French War Ministry. The anti-aircraft guns can't cope, the searchlights are blinding, but they don't save. Someone had to figure out how to make the city invisible, but how to hide Paris? Nothing. Silence, pause, blow. What if we don't have to hide it? An engineer named Fernand Jacopos, a man whose profession sounded very prosaic, an electrical engineer, once said, "What if we just show them another Paris?" The military officials looked at him as if he was crazy, but there was no choice. Fernand received secret government carte blanche and a huge budget at that time. The idea was grandiose in its audacity. Jacopos proposed to build an exact full-scale light copy of Paris, a whole fake ghost town, and place it 24 kilometers northwest of the real capital in the Saint-Germain forest area. The place was not chosen by chance. There the River Seine made a similar bend, as in the center of Paris. From a height of several kilometers, at night in the clouds, the pilots will think that they have found the target. Said, done. The work began to boil in the strictest secrecy. Jacopozzi was not going to build real houses or bridges. He needed only lights, the illusion of life. Wooden frames began to be erected in clearings and forests, but Fernand was a genius for details. He understood that just turning on a bunch of light bulbs means to fail the case. German pilots are not fools, they are looking for specific objects. Therefore, the engineer designed a fake North Station. He spread kilometers of canvas on the ground, painted with a special paint imitating the glass roofs of the station, and illuminated them from below with a dirty dim light, and then more. Jacopozzi invented moving trains. Trolleys with colored lamps were installed on wooden rails, red, white, yellow. The carts slowly rolled in a circle, creating a complete illusion of shunting locomotives from a height. He went even further than the factory. In the real Paris, factories worked around the clock. Flames were shooting out of their pipes. Fernand built fake pipes, inside of which special lamps flashed with the effect of flickering, and fans drove up translucent steam. And most importantly, street lighting. At that time, the street lights in Paris shone unevenly, somewhere brighter, somewhere almost dimmer. Jacopos created a complex relay system that made the light bulbs in his forest randomly blink, imitating an imperfect urban network. It was a masterpiece of engineering and optical illusion. The fake Paris was ready. The ghost town was waiting for its first night, and then the sirens began to wail. The real Paris was plunged into absolute pitch darkness. The switches were off, and 24 kilometers away, in the forest of Saint-Germain, Fernand Jacopaza pressed his button. And there, among the trees, the Champs-Élysées shone, the steam locomotives at the Gare du Nord puffed, the windows of factories twinkled. All this incredible titanic work has never been used for its intended purpose. The fake Paris was completed in 1918. By the time Jacopoz completed his masterpiece of illusion, the war was over. The last German bomber flew away without seeing the brilliant deception. The ghost town was quietly dismantled immediately after the signing of the armistice. It was forgotten about for many decades, and the drawings were covered with dust in the archives of the ministry. But fate loves ironic turns. Fernand Jacopoz was not left without a job. The very man who figured out how to hide Paris in the dark with fake lights became the one who made it the brightest city on earth. It was the Jacopoz who, after the war, were commissioned to illuminate the Arc de Triomphe, the Place de la Concorde, and, finally, the Eiffel Tower. Thanks to him, today we call Paris the City of Lights. It is amazing how the same skill can first serve as an illusion for war, and then become a symbol of beauty in peacetime. But architecture and illusions are just decorations. Real miracles are always created by living beings, and sometimes these creatures don't even understand what changes the course of history, as, for example, in our next absolutely amazing chapter. Story number 3. Air assault with flat tails, the sleeping forests of Idaho. Imagine post-war America. The end of the 40s. People are returning to peaceful life en masse, building new cozy houses, laying fresh paved highways, in the most picturesque corners of the country. And here in Idaho, where nature is simply incredibly beautiful, a real drama unfolds. Only this is not a conflict between people. This is a clash of the two greatest building civilizations of man and beaver. People build roads, beavers build dams. And, to be honest, the beavers did it much harder. They blocked streams, flooded farmlands, turned brand new highways into impassable swamps, and felled century-old trees right on power lines. The locals were furious. They constantly called the Department of Nature Conservation and demanded to remove these furry engineers far away. But where? The foresters found the perfect place. Huge Virginity. Crystal clear Chamberlain Basin Nature Reserve, located far away in the mountains. Their beavers could build their water parks indefinitely, restoring the local ecosystem. The perfect plan. Although there was one tiny problem: no roads. In general, the reserve was absolutely wild. It was possible to get there only on foot along narrow mountain trails. At first, they tried to transport the beavers on mules. Foresters caught the animal, put it in a bag or box, loaded it on the back of a stubborn mule, and went to the mountains. It was a complete failure. Imagine the summer heat outside. The beaver, who is used to cool water, sits in a dark box on the shaking back of the animal. He's angry. He starts gnawing on the box. The mule is frightened by strange sounds and vibrations, starts kicking. As a result, all the participants of the expedition, people, mules, and beavers, were in a state of absolute stress. It was not possible to transfer more than 1 or 2 animals at a time, and almost 100 had to be relocated. It seemed that the situation was deadlocked, but then a man named Elmo Hatter comes on the scene, an ordinary wildlife inspector with a completely unusual imagination. One day in the fall of 1948, Alma was sitting in a warehouse and looking at the mountains of army surplus, left over from the recent war. There were parachutes lying there, ordinary white silk parachutes that no one else needed. And then an idea worthy of a Hollywood comedy is born in his head. What if beavers are thrown off an airplane? Colleagues decided that Alma overheated in the sun. Beavers are parachutists, are you serious? But the inspector was not bowed down. He locked himself in the workshop and began to design a special wooden box. He had a clever mechanism. The box was tightened with ropes, to which the parachute was attached. As soon as the load touched the ground, the tension relaxed. The lock opened, and the doors of the box fell apart. The beaver could only get out and go build his new life. It remained to find a test pilot, and it became a beaver named Geronimo. Well, to be honest, he wasn't really asked for permission. Geronimo was an old, experienced and rather grumpy beaver who was caught in a flooded field. Alma put him in a box, loaded him into a small twin-engine plane, and they took to the sky. The plane is buzzing, the door is open, the wind hits in the face. Jump! A white dome with a pop opens over a green field. The box gently descends to the grass. Click, the doors fall apart. Geronimo, a little dumbfounded, falls out on the grass, dusts himself off, and begins to calmly chew the nearest bush. He was fine. To make sure of the reliability of the system, Alma reset Geronima again. And one more thing. Geronima became a true veteran of the airborne troops. He even started to like it. At least he stopped grumbling when they put him in the box. And now the day of the Great Migration has come. 76 furry engineers were packed in individual wooden capsules. The plane made several flights over the impenetrable forests of Chamberlain Basin. Imagine this picture of a wild, silent forest, and suddenly dozens of white parachutes with wooden boxes begin to descend smoothly from the sky. It looked like an alien invasion, only instead of aliens, fat, confused rodents were sitting inside. The operation went flawlessly. The boxes opened, the beavers scattered along the streams. And do you know what happened next? They have created a real ecological miracle. In a few years, these settlers from heaven built cascades of dams, created new ponds that attracted fish, birds, and moose. They turned the parched valleys into a blooming oasis. And all this is due to the fact that one person looked at an old piece of silk and thought about flying beavers. By the way, our veteran Geronima also received his personal, the best backwater as a reward. And 3 charming females were even dropped to him. Nature is incredibly plastic and forgives us many eccentricities if they are made with a kind heart. And sometimes our crazy ideas save not only animals, but also entire branches of human life. Story number 4. A musical misunderstanding that gave birth to the most famous melody in the world. Imagine England, London, 1994. A small, little-known recording studio, lost somewhere on the outskirts. Inside sits a young guy named Carl Jenkins, a musician, composer, arranger. To be honest, he sits and writes advertising jingles. You know, such short, corrosive melodies that stick in your head all day when you go shopping. That's his job. He composed music for powders, cars, soda, and probably would have continued like this if one day he had not received an order that seemed completely ordinary, but turned out to be something like a shift of tectonic plates in the world of music. A major international airline was going to launch a new large-scale advertising campaign. They needed music, not just a jingle. They needed something global, something that screamed, "We connect continents, we fly through clouds, we unite people." Carl thought about it. He was sitting in the studio and fiddling with the keys of the synthesizer. The orchestra is too classical, the rock is too aggressive. We need vocals, but what kind? Silence, pause, blow. He decides to use a choir, but not a regular choir. He's coming up with something completely wild. Carl writes a grand epic melody that begins with a slow rolling singing, similar to an old hymn. A string orchestra sounds, a powerful bass enters. And then the most interesting text begins. For this global melody, Carl needed a text that everyone would understand. But how to write words that will be understood in London, Tokyo, and Buenos Aires? The answer was ridiculously simple. Nothing. Carl Jenkins just invented the language. Yes, he was sitting in the studio and inventing non-existent words on the go. Syllables that just sounded beautiful together. Ademus, ademus, he hummed to himself. It sounded like Latin, like some ancient forgotten spell, like the voice of the earth itself. He records a demo version, invites an incredible vocalist Miriam Stockley. She sings this fictional text, superimposing her voice layer by layer, creating the effect of a huge African choir. The result was a composition that he called Ademus. The airline's commercial airs. Planes fly beautifully over the ocean, and this mystical powerful music sounds against the background. And then something happens that no one expected. Neither Carl nor the airline. The phones of the studio and offices of the airline are starting to break. People call and ask what kind of song it is, where to buy a cassette, in some language. It's Zulu, it's Swahili, it's ancient Greek. Although no, wait, I have to tell you the truth. No one could buy this song. It didn't exist in nature. Carl wrote exactly 60 seconds of music specifically for advertising. There was nothing else. No album, no full version, no band. Just a minute-long video about airplanes and a fictional language. The hype was such that record companies literally clung to Jenkins. "Boy, you have a hit, write an album, immediately," they shouted. Carl, who had previously composed music for washing machines, suddenly found himself faced with the need to turn a minute sketch into a full-fledged musical project. He sits down and in a few weeks finishes a whole symphony in his non-existent language. The album Songs of Sanctuary Songs is released and explodes the world charts. It goes platinum. It is bought by millions of people around the world. The funniest thing started afterwards. Music critics and linguists seriously began to analyze the texts of Adimus. They wrote entire dissertations trying to find the roots of these words in ancient African dialects or forgotten European languages. They argued about hidden meanings, about the messages encoded in the song. And Carl Jenkins gave an interview and, holding back a smile, repeated over and over again, "Guys, these are just sounds. I invented them in the studio on Tuesday afternoon because I was too lazy to write the real text." But people didn't want to believe. The music was so powerful, so sincere, that the listeners themselves filled these empty servants with meaning. Everyone heard in them what they wanted to hear. For someone it was a prayer for peace, for someone songs of freedom, for someone the voice of ancestors. Adimus has become a phenomenon. This is the only piece of music in history written in a fictional language to advertise airplanes, which is performed by classical orchestras in the best philharmonic halls of the world. Amazing, isn't it? Sometimes the greatest success comes when you just stop trying to please everyone and allow yourself a little madness. But music is a language that we create ourselves. But when a person tries to interfere with the language of nature itself, the results can be much more unpredictable. We will talk further about one such ecological paradox that has turned an entire city into living decoration. Story number 5. A feathered usurper who took over a London park and became a star. Imagine London in the 90s. Classic English weather, gray sky, fine frost, people rushing about their business under black umbrellas. In the heart of the city lies St. James's Park, well-groomed, prim, with neat lawns and a pond, on which swans belonging to the Queen personally swim importantly. This is a place where time seems to flow according to strict British rules. But one morning, in 1998, a completely unexpected guest intruded into this perfect picture. The park ranger, an elderly gentleman named Bob, was making his morning rounds. He was habitually recovering 4 days, checking the feeders, and suddenly he saw something strange on the shore of the pond. A huge bird, white with long thin legs, an absurd pink beak, and a huge bag under it. Pelican. Where did a wild pelican come from in central London? Bob wiped his glasses. The bird has not disappeared. She stood on one leg and looked phlegmatically at the royal swans. Of course, pelicans have lived in St. James Park since the 17th century. They were once presented to King Charles by the Russian ambassador. But those pelicans were local, tame. They lived in a special aviary on the island and received fish according to the schedule. And this one was clearly an outsider, a wild, huge and very confident curly pelican. The park staff named him Louis. At first, everyone thought that Louis had just strayed from the pack during migration, would take a break for a couple of days, and fly on. As if not so. Louis liked London. He was especially impressed by the pond full of selected fatty fish, which no one tried to take away from him. Silence, pause, blow. Louis decided to stay. And not just to stay, but to become the main one here. He quickly realized that the local swans and birds are beautiful but not too smart. Louis started building them. He swam on the pond, spreading his 3-meter wings, and dispersed the royal birds like annoying flies. Park keepers clutched their heads, swans huddled to the banks. But Louis became a real star when he discovered Londoners. Every day during the lunch break, clerks from neighboring offices came to the park. They sat on benches, took out their sandwiches and threw crumbs to pigeons. Louis was watching from behind the bushes. He was a smart guy. He realized that bread is, of course, not fresh fish, but it is given just like that. One has only to approach. And Louis went to the people. Imagine the picture, a respectable gentleman. In a 3-piece suit, he sits on a bench, lives a ham sandwich. Suddenly, a 15-kilogram bird with a beak the size of a baseball bat plops down on the bench next to him. The bird looks the gentleman straight in the eye. The gentleman freezes. The bird opens its huge bag. But to be honest, to refuse such a thing. The offer was difficult. Louis became an urban legend. He learned to beg for food masterfully. He approached tourists, posed for photos. Yes, he literally froze when he saw the lens, and then he clicked his beak demanding, waiting for payment. He was given cookies, crackers, sometimes even sausages. The park rangers tried to fight it. They were putting up signs. Please do not feed the pelican, he is on a diet. They tried to overtake him from the benches, but Louis was more cunning. He memorized the routes of the caretakers and appeared where they were not. Although no, wait, it wasn't so harmless. Louis began to get fat. His love of fast food has become a problem. Caretaker Bob was seriously concerned about the bird's health. Eating chips and croissants is not the best diet for a wild pelican. A radical decision was made to put Louis on a strict fish ration and close him in the aviary with the others, the right pelicans. The operation to capture Louis was like a comedy sketch. 5 adult men were running across the lawns with nets after a giant bird, which deftly dodged, flapped its wings, and seemed to be openly mocking them. In the end, Louis was caught. He was placed in an aviary, a draw of selected herring. And what do you think? Louis went on a hunger strike. He stood in the corner of the enclosure, turned away from the fish, and with all his appearance showed contempt for the prison Belunda. He wanted freedom, he wanted attention, he wanted his half-eaten cheese sandwich from a bank clerk. For 2 days, Louis refused to eat. The caretakers gave up, they opened the aviary. Louis majestically walked out, dusted himself off, and went straight to his favorite bench near the fountain. The park authorities realized that it was impossible to re-educate this bird. I had to compromise. Louis was allowed to walk around the park, but the caretakers were instructed to give him a double portion of the most delicious fish early in the morning so that by lunch, he would be full and less pestering people with chips. Louis lived a long and happy life in St. James's Park. He became a symbol of London's equanimity and ability to adapt to any circumstances. He proved that even in the most prim place, you can set your own rules if you have enough audacity and great charm. It's amazing how animals sometimes demonstrate a character that makes people change their plans. But sometimes people, driven by their ambitions, create projects that change the appearance of entire regions, leaving behind only strange giant monuments to their dreams. We will talk about such an ambitious failure in the next chapter. Story number 6. A male rocket that delivered only smoke and disappointment. Imagine England in the 30s of the last century. This is the time when the world was raving about speed. Cars are becoming streamlined, trains are breaking records, and newspapers are full of headlines about new air flights. People want things to happen quickly. No one is interested in yesterday's news anymore, and the letters that go on 4 weeks seem to be a real mockery of progress. Residents of tiny islands off the coast of Scotland felt this problem especially acutely. In winter, when storms started, ferries simply could not go to sea. The islands of Scarborough, Harris and Lewis were cut off from the mainland for a week or even months. No letters from relatives, no fresh newspapers, no medicines. Complete isolation under the howling of the icy wind. And then in 1934, a man named Gerhard Zucker enters the scene. Gerhard was a young German engineer, inventor, and, frankly, an incredible dreamer. He came to the UK with an idea that sounded like a plot from a science fiction novel by H.G. Wells. Why do we need ferries? Why do we need planes that need runways? Zucker was talking, waving the blueprints in front of British post officials. We will deliver letters by rockets. Yes, you heard right. Mail rockets. The idea was ingeniously simple and insanely dangerous. Zucker designed a metal cylinder about a meter long, inside a compartment for letters, behind a charge of gunpowder. The rocket was mounted on a simple wooden guide, the fuse was lit, and the parcel with the mail was supposed to fly across the raging strait, directly into the hands of the joyful. The islanders, the officials of the post office, people in strict suits and bowler hats, listened to him with their jaws hanging open. On the one hand, it sounded like the ravings of a madman. On the other hand, what if it works? The problem of communication with the islands was acute, and Zucker asked for very little money for testing. Silence, pause, blow. The British Post gave the go-ahead. The first official test was scheduled for the end of July 1934. The place of action was chosen by the coast of Scotland, firm where the rocket was supposed to fly to the island of Scarborough. The distance of about 1.5 kilometers is a mere trifle for an engineering genius, as Gerhard assured. A crowd gathered on the beach. Journalists with huge cameras, local residents, postal officials with stopwatches in their hands. Zucker himself fussed around his shiny silver rocket like a caring mother hen. 1,200 letters were solemnly loaded into a special compartment. Each letter was decorated with a special stamp, personally invented by Zucker, the rocket mail stamp. Collectors were already crazy about these envelopes, anticipating their future historical value. Gerhard checked the guide. I made sure that the wind was fair. I asked the crowd to move away. He struck a match. The wick hissed, releasing a trickle of white smoke. A second, 2, 3. The crowd held its breath. The roar was deafening. A flash of flame blinded the audience. The rocket shot forward. Although no, wait, it wasn't quite so triumphant. The rocket really rushed, but not forward. She rushed in all directions at the same time. There was a monstrous explosion. The silver cylinder was blown to pieces right on the launch pad. A cloud of acrid black smoke covered the beach. When the smoke cleared, the shocked spectators saw a sad picture. The wooden guide rail turned into splinters, and in a radius of 50 meters from the sky, slowly, like autumn leaves, burned scraps of letters were planned. 1,200 messages, hopes and news turned into confetti. Postal officials clutched their bowlers in horror. Journalists scribbled furiously in notebooks. And Gerhard Zucker stood with his hands down and looked at the smoldering remnants of his dream. It would seem that this was the end of the rocket builder's career. But Zucker was stubborn. He begged the post office to give. He has a second chance. I put in too much gunpowder, a mistake in the calculations, I'll fix it, he shouted. Surprisingly, the British, famous for their restraint, agreed to another experiment. Perhaps they just felt sorry for this enthusiast. The second trial took place a few weeks later in a different location. This time the rocket was supposed to fly to Harris Island. Again the crowd, again the letters, again the fuse, and again the explosion. This time, the rocket managed to break away from the guide, flew 20 meters above the water, turned a funny somersault in the air, and crashed into the icy waves with a loud plop. The few envelopes that managed to be fished out of the sea were delivered to the addressees in a pitiful state, with blurred ink and fallen-off stamps. The British Post has officially stated that the rocket delivery of letters is considered inappropriate and poses a threat to correspondence. The project was curtailed. Gerhard Zucker, disappointed and ridiculed by the press, soon left the yuck. His dream of a fast rocket mail has remained a dream, a funny curiosity in the history of transport. But you know what's funny? Those burnt envelopes from the first launch and the soaked letters from the second became a real holy grail for philatelists. Today, these pathetic scraps of paper, miraculously survived after the failed experiments of a mad engineer, are being sold at auctions for tens of thousands of dollars. People are willing to pay a lot of money for documentary evidence, one of the loudest and most sincere failures in the history of the Post. Sometimes our ambitions burn with a bright flame, leaving behind only ashes and laughter. But it also happens that the ambitions of one person, backed up by titanic stubbornness, are able not just to survive failure, but to build a real one around themselves. And in the next chapter, we will go to a man who decided to build his world out of what everyone else considered just garbage. Story number 7. A Palace for the Lazy, or How the Love of a Cool Drink Canceled Lawn Mowing. Imagine the South of America, the hot, incredibly stuffy state of Texas, the end of the 60s, an ordinary suburb of the huge city of Houston. A classic one-story dream, neat houses, friendly neighbors, mailboxes by the road, and, of course, lawns. Perfectly smooth, emerald green lawns, which every self-respecting homeowner is obliged to take care of, cherish, and cut every weekend. This is the law of the suburbs, a tradition. And now meet John. John Milkovich was a simple, hard-working man. For decades he worked as an upholsterer on the railway. Every evening, he came home tired, sat on the porch, opened a can of cold beer, and looked at his yard. To be honest, John sincerely hated two things on this planet with all his heart. The first was mowing the lawn. The second is to paint the wooden facade of the house, which was constantly cracked and licked under the scorching Texas sun. Listen, he grumbled to his wife Mary, who wants to drag a heavy mower around the yard in 40-degree heat, and then wave a brush. Neighbors on weekends on the body swore, but cut their grass, and John thought. He was a practical man, and in 1968, he made a radical decision. He just poured concrete all over his front yard. No grass, no problems. But so that Mary would not be upset about the loss of comfort, John showed imagination. Until the concrete froze, he began to press thousands of shiny glass balls, coins, beautiful stones, and pieces of brass into it. It turned out to be a sparkling, fantastic mosaic. The neighbors shook their heads, but the lawn was conquered forever. The second problem remained the house. The wooden boards needed paint again. John was sitting in his concrete mosaic yard. In his hand he held an empty aluminum beer can, fresh and shiny. Aluminum does not rust. Aluminum does not fade. Aluminum does not need to be painted. Silence, pause, blow. He looked at the jar, then at the peeling wall of the house, and at that moment, one of the craziest architectural projects in history was born in the head of a tired railroad worker. John took a pair of metal scissors, cut the empty jar lengthwise, cut off the bottom and lid, and unfolded it into a flat and shiny rectangle. Then he went to the wall of the house and nailed this rectangle right on top of the old paint. He took the second jar, the third. From that day on, John's every evening followed the same scenario. He would sit on the porch with his wife or friends. They would empty the cans of drink, and then John would methodically turn them into aluminum scales for his house. He took his time. It wasn't an artist's obsession. It was just a very unhurried repair of bank after bank, row after row. Years passed, the house began to transform. It sparkled in the sun with silver, gold, and bright logos. The neighbors, who at first twirled their finger at the temple, began to come just to look. It looked weird, but stunningly neat. John even matched the jars by color, laying out geometric patterns on the walls. But his struggle with everyday inconveniences did not end there. The sun was unbearably hot in Texas in the summer, and the air conditioning bills were driving John crazy. He needed awnings and blinds. Buying them in a store is too banal. He looked at the mountains of shiny aluminum ring openers that remained from the cans. What if we connect them? John began to weave these little rings into long sparkling garlands. He hung them all along the porch, creating thick metal curtains. And then a miracle happened, which he himself did not expect. When the light evening wind blew, thousands of aluminum chains quietly collided with each other. The house began to sing. It made a gentle melodious chime, similar to the sound of expensive Chinese wind chimes. And the shadow of these garlands really lowered the temperature in the rooms by several degrees. For 18 long years, John and Mary slowly and happily covered their house with metal. During this time, they flattened and nailed to the walls more than 50,000 cans. When reporters came to John, who listened to about the amazing sparkling palace, they asked him about high art, about ecology, about the hidden meanings of his installation. And John, adjusting his cap, laughed and replied, "Guys, what an art. Some people collect stamps, but I just collected cans. I was just too lazy to paint this damn house." He never recognized himself as an artist, but today this house, officially recognized as a cultural landmark of the city. Tourists from all over the country come to see the brilliant monument of the human line, which quite accidentally turned into a real architectural masterpiece. It's amazing how the desire to save one's own strength gives birth to beauty that outlives its creator. Sometimes the most brilliant things appear simply because someone didn't want to do the extra work. And it also happens that a tiny ridiculous oversight turns an ordinary object into something that drives collectors around the world crazy. We will talk about such an accident, which costs a fortune, in the next chapter. 8. An inverted biplane, or how a momentary distraction created America's most expensive piece of paper. Imagine a post office in Washington, May 19, 18. The First World War is in full swing, but life is boiling at home in the States. People are hungry for news, business demands speed, and the good old trains already seem unbearably slow. The government is preparing a real revolution, the launch of regular airmail. Letters will fly across the sky. From New York to Washington and Philadelphia. It was a technological breakthrough, the pride of the nation. Naturally, for such an epoch-making event, a special postage stamp was needed. Not some boring profile of the president, but a symbol of a new era. We chose the newest Curtis Jenny postal biplane, painted in the colors of the national flag. The stamp was supposed to be two-tone, a red frame, and a blue plane in the center. The face value is as much as 24 cents. At that time, a lot of money for a letter. Printing two-color stamps at that time was a nightmare for printers. A sheet of paper was first run through a press with red paint, printing frames. Then the sheets had to be carefully removed, dried, stacked, transferred to another machine, and run again with blue paint to imprint the plane exactly in the center of the frame. The best masters worked in the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. They worked day and night because there were only a few days left before the first flight. Tension hung in the air, mingling with the smell of fresh printing ink. And so, on one of these hectic days, a tired printer takes a stack of sheets with ready-made red frames. He brings them to the machine with blue paint. Silence. Pause. A blow. He puts one sheet upside down. The machine dispassionately does its job. The press is lowered. The blue plane is imprinted in a red frame, perfectly centered, but only with the wheels up. One single sheet of 100 stamps with an inverted airplane is just 100 tiny pieces of paper, lost among millions of correct ones. A mistake that would have cost the printer a bonus if the inspectors had noticed it in time. But the inspectors are also tired. The sheet failed to pass inspection, was packed in a bundle, and sent to a regular post office. And now let's get acquainted with William Robbie, a 29-year-old clerk from a brokerage office, a modest guy with glasses, who passionately loved to collect stamps. He wasn't rich, but he was saving up to buy a whole sheet of new airmail stamps right on the day they were released. On May 14th, the day before the first historic flight, William withdraws his entire stash from the $24 account and runs to the post office in Washington. My heart is pounding. He asks the cashier to show him the new stamps. Cashier casually takes out a pack and pushes the first sheet to the window. William looks at him, blinks, wipes his glasses. The planes on the stamps are flying upside down. All 100 pieces. William catches his breath. He's a collector. He knows what a typographical marriage is. He realizes that he is holding in his hands not just a piece of paper, but an incredible rarity. Trying to hide the tremor in his voice, he hands the cashier $24. "I'll take this sheet, sir." The cashier shrugs, takes the money, and gives the sheet. William goes outside. His legs are giving way. He realizes that he has just hit the jackpot. Although no, wait, he didn't even imagine the extent of his luck. William returns to work, shows the sheet to fellow philatelists. The news is spreading through the city with the speed of a forest fire. A clerk who bought stamps for $24 sells them a week later to a well-known Philadelphia dealer, Eugene Klein, for $15,000. Crazy money for a simple clerk in 1918. They could buy a nice house and a car. Klein, an experienced businessman, understands that he will not keep the entire sheet. Unprofitable. He sells it to the eccentric millionaire and collector Colonel Green for $20,000. And Colonel Green does what modern philatelists have a heart attack from. He carefully tears up the sheet on a separate stamp. He keeps a few for himself, and the rest sells one by one. The inverted Jenny, as the brand was called in honor of the biplane, is scattered through private collections all over the country. From this moment, the incredible, almost detective life of each of these 100 tiny pieces of paper begins. They were stolen from safes, they were forged by ingenious scammers, cutting out the plane with a blade and sticking it back upside down. One brand was accidentally pulled into the vacuum cleaner during cleaning, and its owner almost went crazy, sorting through a dust bag. 4 stamps collected in one block were stolen at an exhibition in 1955 and surfaced one by one for decades. Every time an upside-down Jenny appears at an auction, it becomes a worldwide sensation. The price for one such brand with an inverted blue airplane reached up to $1.5 million. $1.5 million for a piece of paper the size of a fingernail, which was born only because a tired printer once confused the top and bottom. It's amazing how a momentary oversight turns into legend, which is being chased by the rich all over the world. Sometimes the value of things is determined not by their perfection, but by their unique flaw. But it also happens that people create things that are completely useless at first glance intentionally, just for the sake of a joke or a sporting interest. And about one such thing that literally tied the hands of its creator, we will talk further. Story number 9. The perfect trap that turned into the main simulator for Houdini. Imagine England at the beginning of the 20th century. An amazing time. The era of bold bets, gentlemen's clubs, and a love of all sorts of mechanical curiosities. In London, a man named John Philbrick worked in a workshop littered with metal shavings and drawings. John was a blacksmith, but not someone who shod horses. No, he was a master lock genius who could open any door and create a bolt that no one else could open. In those years, a whole industry of unopened safes and handcuffs flourished in Britain. The police, prisons, bankers all wanted guarantees. And so in 1904, John receives an unusual order from the Daily Mirror newspaper. They needed something special, not just handcuffs. They needed a challenge. A challenge for the man whose name was thundered all over the world by Harry Houdini. A great escapist who was freed from any shackles, got out of locked boxes underwater, and escaped from the most secure prison cells. The newspaper wanted to make a show of the century, publicly dispraise the magician by putting him in such handcuffs, from which it is impossible to get out. John Philbrick accepted the challenge. He locked himself in his workshop for 5 long years. Yes, you heard right. For 5 years he created only one handcuffs. It was a work of art, not just a shackle. Massive, heavy, shiny chrome steel, but their secret was inside. Philbrick developed a mechanism of such fiendish complexity that even modern engineers hardly understand how it worked without computers. There was no usual keyhole inside the handcuffs. There was a system of 6 concentric rings and levers. To open them, it was not a key that was needed, but a whole sequence of actions. Turn, press, turn again, pull. A mistake in one movement, and the mechanism was locked tightly. Moreover, John made them mirrored. This meant that by putting them on his hands, a person blocked access to the locks for himself. The left hand was covering the right well, and the right hand was covering the left. The handcuffs were called simply and tastefully mirrored handcuffs. Silence, pause. A blow. March 17, 1904. London Hippodrome Theatre. 4,000 viewers. Abundance to overflowing. A confident, smiling Harry Houdini stands on the stage. Next to him is a newspaper representative with a velvet cushion on which the handcuffs are lying. The journalist announces the conditions. If Houdini can get out, the newspaper recognizes his victory. If not, he admits defeat before. In front of all of London, Houdini examined the handcuffs. His smile faded. He realized that this was not an ordinary police toy, but a masterpiece of engineering, created especially for him. But there was nowhere to retreat. Click. Massive steel bracelets closed around his wrists. Houdini entered his famous ghostly office, a small screen on the stage, hiding him from the public eye. The orchestra began to play tense music. It's been 10 minutes, 20, 30. Houdini was usually released in a couple of minutes. The audience began to whisper. After 45 minutes, Houdini's head appeared from behind the screen. He was pale, and sweat was running down his face. "Can I have a pillow under my knees?" he asked. The audience gasped. The great magician was kneeling in front of the castle. They gave him a pillow. He disappeared again. An hour passed. The orchestra was already tired of playing, and just sat in silence. The tension in the hall could be cut with a knife. Suddenly Houdini looked out again. "Take off my jacket," he demanded. The journalist chuckled. "No, sir, free your hands first, and then take off your jacket. We won't help you cheat." Houdini, gritting his teeth, went back. And then something happened that no one expected. A penknife flew out from behind the screen. Houdini clamped it in his teeth, and cut his jacket into shreds. He needed to free his shoulders for a maneuver. An hour and a half has passed. Some of the audience started to leave. Journalists were already rubbing their hands, anticipating a sensational headline. Houdini is defeated. Although no, wait, I have to tell you the truth. Houdini never gave up. At the 110th minute, after almost 2 hours of fighting, Harry jumped out from behind the screen with a shout of victory. The handcuffs clattered onto the stage. His hands were bruised and bruised, his shirt was torn, he was staggering with fatigue, but he was free. The hall exploded with applause. People were crying. Men were throwing hats in the air. Houdini was picked up in his arms and carried around the stage. It was his greatest triumph. But the most interesting thing happened later. Many years later, after the death of the magician, historians began to study the device of those mirror handcuffs. And they came to the conclusion that it is physically impossible to open them honestly without a key in 2 hours. According to one version, Houdini performed a miracle of dexterity that evening. According to another, even more improbable, his wife, who kissed him before he went behind the screen, handed him a tiny duplicate key in his mouth. But even with a key, it was a feat to open this diabolical mechanism with your hands shackled behind your back. John Philbrick, the creator of handcuffs, never found out exactly how Houdini won his creation. But he went down in history as the man who made the greatest wizard of the world sweat with fear for 2 hours. It's amazing how the engineering genius of one person can become a challenge for the genius of another. Sometimes such duels of minds give rise to legends. But it happens that the challenge is not man, but nature itself. And then people start doing things that seem completely impossible. For example, to build roads where even birds fly with difficulty. We will talk about one such road laid literally through the air in the next chapter. Story number 10. The bridge that the Incas wove, and which lives forever thanks to the human will. Imagine Peru. The high-altitude Andes, where the air is so thin that every step is difficult. A deep gorge, under which the icy Apurimac River boils. The cliffs are steep, inaccessible. 500 years ago, one of the main arteries of the great Inca Empire passed through here. They had to somehow get over this chasm. It is impossible to build a stone bridge. Too deep, too wide, and there is no technology for such flights. The tree will rot in a couple of seasons in a humid climate. And then the Incas came up with something brilliant. They decided not to build a bridge, they decided to weave it out of grass. Yes, from the usual tough and high-altitude ichu grass, which grows everywhere on the slopes. Inca engineering was simple and elegant. If you take one blade of grass, it will break. If you weave a pigtail, it will withstand the weight of the stone. And if you weave a rope as thick as a man's thigh, it will withstand an army. This is how Quechua appeared, the last Inca river bridge in the world. It has been hanging over the abyss for 5 centuries. But here's the catch. Grass is a short-lived material. Under the rain and the sun, it dries up, becomes brittle and rots. The grass bridge lives for exactly 1 year. Therefore, every year in June, 4 local communities gather at the edges of the gorge to perform an incredible ritual. They cut off the old bridge and dump it into the river. And immediately, in front of the amazed audience, he begins to weave a new one, manually. Silence, pause, blow. The work starts long before that day. Women and children climb mountains, collect grass, soak it and weave it into thin ropes. Kilometers of ropes. Then the men twist these thin ropes into thicker ropes, and those, in turn, are woven into 3 huge heavy main cables, each as thick as an adult's body. On the day of construction, the oldest person, the bridge engineer, directs the process. First, a thin rope is thrown across the gorge. Thicker ropes are tied to it and pulled to the other side. And finally, with incredible efforts, the main load-bearing cables are pulled under shouts and encouragement. They are fixed on huge stone pillars cut into the rocks back in the time of the Incas. When the foundation is ready, 4 brave weavers of the bridge come out on these ropes swinging over the abyss. They begin to weave the fabric of the bridge and the railing, moving from the edges to the center, without insurance, over the boiling river. Only the skill passed down from father to son for hundreds of years withstands them from falling. It looks like magic. From the chaos of grass and ropes, a strong, beautiful structure is born right in the air. By the evening of the 3rd day, the bridge is ready. 28 meters long, it hangs over the river like a golden thread. The old bridge floats downstream, taking with it all the troubles of the past year, and the new one, smelling of fresh grass, is ready to serve people. In honor of the completion of the construction, a grand celebration with music and dancing is organized. The elders are the first to cross the new bridge, to show that the spirits of the mountains have accepted the work. This bridge is not just a ferry, it is a living link of times. The Incas disappeared, their empire fell, the conquistadors destroyed the stone cities. But this seemingly fragile grass bridge has outlived everyone. Why? Because it lives in people, in their hands, in their memory, in their willingness to get together every year and do a common cause. If they are lazy for at least 1 year and do not weave new ropes, the tradition will be interrupted, and the bridge will disappear forever. But they come from year to year, century after century. And thanks to this miracle of collective will, today we can walk with our own feet along the same path that the ancient Chasques, the messengers of the Inca Empire, walked. Amazing, isn't it? The most durable things in the world are not stone or steel, but human traditions. Sometimes, in order to preserve something eternal, it is necessary to destroy the old and create a new one every year. And it also happens that people create something grandiose just to prove their case in a dispute. And then projects are born that can change the landscape of an entire continent. One such dispute, which led to the appearance of the longest fence in the world, will be discussed in the next chapter. Story number 11. The rabbit fence that divided the continent and common sense. Imagine Australia at the end of the 19th century, a huge boundless continent full of wild, incredible nature. Kangaroos gallop across the plains, koalas chew eucalyptus. Farmers raise millions of sheep to clothe half of the world in wool. Life seems like an idyll. But in 1859, one man did an act that changed everything. Thomas Austin, a wealthy landowner from England, brought 24 wild rabbits to his estate near Melbourne. A little hunting on the weekend, like at home, won't hurt, he cheerfully told his friends, releasing the big-eared ones into the wild. Austin didn't know one simple fact. Rabbits didn't have natural enemies in Australia. In general, no foxes, no wolves, no birds of prey, capable of coping with their reproduction rate. After 10 years, 24 rabbits turned into 2 million. They devoured everything: grass, bushes, tree bark, farmers' crops. They dug holes everywhere, turning the fertile lands into a desert, pitted with holes into which sheep fell and broke their legs. It was an invasion on a biblical scale. A gray, fluffy, eternally hungry wave rolled westward, destroying the ecosystem of the continent. The farmers were desperate. They shot, poisoned, left traps. It's useless. There were only more rabbits. And then the government of Western Australia made a decision that is still controversial among historians and environmentalists. They decided to build the Great Wall of China, only made of wire and against rabbits. In 1901, the construction of fence number 1 for protection from rabbits began. Imagine the scale of 1833 kilometers. Through deserts, through forests, through salt marshes, from the southern coast of the ocean to the very north. It was the longest continuous structure ever built by man at that time. Hundreds of workers have been driving eucalyptus poles for years, pulling the net, digging it deep into the ground, so that rabbits could not make a tunnel. A patrol road was laid along the fence. Special inspectors on camels, later in cars, toured their sites, checking the integrity of the grid. Silence, pause, blow. By the time the construction was completed in 1907, one small but very unpleasant detail had become clear. The rabbits were already on the other side. While people were building, the eared invaders simply bypassed the construction site from the north, or filtered through the still uncovered areas. The fence turned out to be a useless monument to human naivety. But the Australians didn't give up. They built fence number 2, another 1,166 kilometers. And then fence number 3. In total, the length of this system was 3,256 kilometers. And you know what? It worked. Well, partly. The fence didn't stop all the rabbits, but it slowed down their migration. He saved a part of the western lands from complete destruction. Farmers behind the fence could somehow control the pest population on their plots. The most amazing thing is that this fence is still standing. It is regularly repaired, patrolled. It has become a real attraction, a symbol of man's struggle with the consequences of his own stupidity. But this story has another completely unexpected twist. In the 30s of the 20th century, when there were too many rabbits even behind the fence, the government decided to use biological weapons. They imported the myxomatosis virus, which is deadly for European rabbits. The epidemic wiped out 99% of the population. Victory. As if not so. The 1% of rabbits that survived were immune to the virus. They passed this immunity on to their offspring. And today, super rabbits live in Australia, which no infection takes. The fence is patrolled. They drive, and the rabbits continue to jump on both sides of the grid, reminding us that nature cannot be defeated by brute force. You can only learn to live with it, correcting your mistakes, or build fences as long as a continent, hoping that this time it will definitely work. Sometimes the solutions to problems turn out to be more complicated than the problems themselves, but it happens that decisions come completely by chance, from an area that is not relevant at all. For example, from cooking. And in the next chapter, we will learn how the love of sweets once saved the lives of thousands of sailors. Story number 12. The marmalade that defeated the great scurvy and fed the whole fleet. Imagine England in the 18th century, the era of great geographical discoveries, when ships sailed the oceans, discovering new lands. But the sailors had one terrible invisible enemy. Neither storms, nor pirates, nor even sea monsters. Scurvy? This disease mowed down the crew by the thousands. Gums bled, teeth fell out, old wounds opened, people weakened, and died in agony. No one knew the reason. Doctors of that time offered to treat scurvy with sulfuric acid, vinegar, seawater, and even burying the patient in sand up to the neck. As you understand, only sand helped, and even then not for long. In 1747, the Scottish ship's Dr. James Lind conducted the first ever clinical experiment. He divided 12 sick sailors into pairs and gave them different medicines: cider, vitriol, vinegar, seawater, a mixture of garlic and mustard, and 2 oranges and 1 lemon. The 2 who received citrus fruits recovered miraculously after 6 days. It would seem that this is the solution: lemon juice. But there was one giant problem of how to keep fresh juice on a long voyage without refrigerators. He turned sour, turned insipid, wandered. They tried to boil it, vitamin C was destroyed. They tried to mix it with rum, it turned out grog, delicious. But there were few vitamins. The sailors continued to die. And then a man named Lachlan Rose comes on the scene. He was not a doctor, he was not a sailor. He was the son of a shipbuilder and owned a small supply company. Provisions for ships in the Scottish port of Leith. Lachlan saw the suffering of the sailors and wanted to help, but he wanted to earn even more. He knew that the Admiralty was willing to pay a lot of money for scurvy funds that could be stored for years. Silence, pause, blow. He started experimenting. Rose bought lemons and limes in barrels. He tried drying, salting, drying. Nothing worked. The juice was spoiling. And then one day, in 1867, he decided to try something new: sugar. Lots of sugar. He took fresh lime juice, which was cheaper than lemons, since he grew up in the British colonies, and mixed it with a huge amount of sugar. It turned out to be a thick sweet syrup. But that wasn't all. Sugar itself is an excellent preservative, but the juice could still ferment. Lachlan added a little sulfur dioxide, a safe preservative used by winemakers. The liquid turned out to be amber in color. Delicious, sweet, and most importantly, it has not been spoiled for years. Rose named his invention Rose Lime Juice. In the same year, the British Parliament passed a law. On every ship going on a long voyage, there should be a supply of lime juice, and every sailor is entitled to a daily portion. It worked instantly. Scurvy has practically disappeared from the British Navy. The sailors have become healthier, stronger, and more resilient. But this story has a funny sequel. American sailors, who continued to suffer from scurvy because their government was saving on limes, looked at the British with envy. They called them limey. This nickname stuck fast. At first, only English sailors were called that, then all Britons. And now in America, the word limey is a slang, a little mocking name for any Englishman. And what about Lachlan Rose? He became incredibly rich. His syrup turned out to be so delicious that not only sailors, but also ordinary housewives began to buy it. It was added to water, lemonade was made, pancakes were watered with it. Soon the bartenders discovered that this syrup is perfectly combined with gin. So the classic gimlet cocktail was born. The company founded by Rose still exists today. You can go to any supermarket and buy the same bottle with the label Rose Lime Juice, which was invented by a Scotsman a century and a half ago to save sailors from scurvy. It's amazing how a simple desire to earn money and a little sugar can change the history of navigation and save millions of lives. Sometimes the solution to a global problem lies literally on the surface in a jar of jam. But it happens that solving one problem creates another, even more ambitious one. And then people have to come up with completely crazy things to correct the consequences of their own inventions. Story number 13. Operation Cat Landing and Rescue of the Village from Rats. Imagine the island of Borneo in the 50s of the last century. A tropical paradise, jungle, monkeys, exotic birds. But the locals had one big problem: malaria. This disease, which is carried by mosquitoes, mowed down entire villages. People died by the hundreds. In desperation, the island's government turned to the World Health Organization for help. They sent their best specialists. They surveyed the area, shook their heads, and pronounced a verdict. It is necessary to poison mosquitoes. DDT is the solution. DDT is a powerful insecticide, which was then considered a miracle remedy. It was sprayed from airplanes, it was processed at home, it was poured literally everywhere. And you know what? It worked. Mosquitoes have disappeared, malaria has receded. The villagers breathed a sigh of relief. Doctors celebrated the victory of science over nature. No, wait, I have to tell you the truth. Nature never gives up so easily. Soon after the victory over the mosquitoes, strange things began to happen in the villages. At first, the roofs of the residents began to collapse. The thatched roofs of their huts simply crumbled into dust. It turned out that the poison killed not only mosquitoes, but also wasps that fed on caterpillars eating straw. Without autumn, the caterpillars multiplied in incredible numbers and began to devour houses. But these were small things compared to what happened next. DDT is a cumulative poison. He doesn't disappear without a trace. It was eaten by cockroaches that survived after processing. Cockroaches were eaten by lizards and geckos. The geckos were eaten by cats. And that's where the chain closed. Cats began to die en masse. In some villages, not a single marca remained, and when the cats disappeared, the rats came. Hordes of rats. They poured out of the jungle in the village like a gray living wave. They ate grain stalks, gnawed furniture, attacked sleeping people. But the worst thing was that the rats brought plague and typhus with them. The situation has become critical. Malaria was defeated, but now people were threatened with starvation and epidemics of even more terrible diseases. Residents were in a panic. Doctors grabbed their heads. They realized that they had violated the fragile ecological balance and created a catastrophe themselves. It was necessary to return the cats urgently. But where to get them in the jungle? And then one of the craziest rescue operations in history was born. Operation Cat Landing. The British Royal Air Force has allocated transport aircraft. Stray cats began to be collected all over the world. They were caught on the streets of London, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur. They were put in special wicker baskets containers. A small parachute was attached to each basket. Silence. Pause. A blow. Imagine the picture. A heavy military plane is flying over the remote jungles of Borneo. The cargo hatch opens. And from there, like paratroopers, cats begin to jump out. 14,000 tailed rescuers, according to other sources, several hundred, but the legend says about thousands. They descended smoothly on parachutes, right on the heads of the astonished residents, and, more importantly, on the heads of impudent rats. After landing, the cats, a little dumbfounded by the flight, immediately got down to business. Instincts took their toll. They started hunting. The rats, not expecting an attack from the air, were shocked. The feline special forces quickly brought order to the villages. The rodent population has sharply decreased, grain stocks have been saved, the threat of an epidemic has passed. Bornean residents greeted the furry paratroopers as heroes. Cats were fed the best fish. They were allowed to sleep on the softest mats. Since then, cats have been treated with special respect on the island. This story has entered the textbooks of ecology as a classic example of the fact that you cannot rudely interfere with nature, even with the best intentions. One ill-considered decision can pull a chain of events that will have to be corrected with the help of flying cats. It's amazing how sometimes the most serious problems are solved by the most ridiculous methods. But it also happens that the problem seems unsolvable in principle. For example, when it is necessary to build a railway through an impassable swamp where any equipment sinks. And then it's not cats that come to the rescue, but completely different animals. Story number 14. Elephants are railway workers who paved the way through the jungles of Burma. Imagine Southeast Asia, the end of the 19th century. Burma, now Myanmar. Impenetrable jungles, mountains, malarial swamps. The British Empire decided to build a railway through this wilderness. The task seemed impossible. The equipment of that time simply could not pass where it was necessary to lay rails. Steam excavators were stuck in the mud. Horses and mules died of disease and exhaustion. People were falling down from the heat and fever. It seemed that the project was doomed. The jungle was winning. And then elephants come on the scene. Elephants have been used for logging in Burma for centuries. These smart, strong giants could carry logs, cut down trees, and pass where any tractor got stuck. British engineers decided to take a chance. They hired local mahouts with their elephants. At first it seemed crazy. Elephants set up the railroad, but the animals quickly proved that they are the best builders in the world. Elephants cleared the gaps, felling trees with one blow of the head. They dragged heavy sleepers and rails, laying them down to the nearest centimeter. They even learned how to work in a team. 2 elephants took the rail from both ends with their trunks, lifted it, carried it to the place of laying, and gently lowered it onto the sleepers. Then one of the elephants pushed the rail with his foot so that it lay flat, without any cranes and jacks. But the most amazing thing began when it came to bridges. There are many rivers and ravines in the jungles of Burma. It was necessary to build bridges. Piles were hammered manually, but how to lift heavy beams to a height? Elephants came to the rescue here too. They have learned to work like live cranes. The elephant took a log, lifted it with his trunk, stood up on his hind legs, and handed the log to the workers on the bridge. Or pushed it with his head up the inclined deck. Silence, pause, blow. One elephant named Bangela has become a true legend. He was huge, strong, and incredibly smart. Bangela didn't just execute commands, he understood the essence of the work. One day, the workers could not move a stuck trolley. 10 people pushed, but it was useless. Bangela was called. The elephant came up, examined the trolley, rested his forehead against the back wall, and, carefully, without jerks, pushed it out onto a flat area. The workers applauded. Bangala just snorted and went to get sugar cane. Elephants worked not for fear, but for conscience. Everyone had their own character, their own habits. They knew their drivers by sight and obeyed only them. In the evening, after the shift, the elephants were taken to the river, where they bathed with pleasure, watering each other with water. It was like a team of workers resting after a hard day. Thanks to the elephants, the railway was built. Trains went through the jungle, connecting cities and towns. But the story of the elephant railway workers did not end there. During the Second World War, they came to the aid of people again. When the Japanese invaded Burma, the British retreated. It was necessary to evacuate women, children, and the wounded across the mountains to India. There were no roads. And then the elephants, the very builders, became rescuers. Under the leadership of the legendary Colonel James Williams, known as Elephant Bill, the elephant caravan, led by Benjala, passed through the most difficult passes, carrying people and loads on their backs. They have built dozens of temporary bridges, transported hundreds of refugees, and saved thousands of lives. This crossing has gone down in history as the Elephant Trail. Benjala died at the end of the journey, but his feat is still remembered. It's amazing how animals that we are used to seeing in zoos or circuses can become real heroes, builders, and rescuers. Sometimes nature gives us helpers where technology is powerless. But it also happens that a person himself becomes an assistant to nature, saving an entire species from extinction. Thanks to loneliness. We will talk about one such story, where the last representative of the species found love, in the next chapter. Story number 15. How one male and his reflection saved an entire species from extinction. Imagine Australia in the 1990s. Lord Howe Island is a tiny piece of land in the middle of the ocean. It was once home to thousands of insects that are not found anywhere else on the planet. But the rats that came to the island from ships at the beginning of the century destroyed almost everything, including the amazing creatures of the giant stick insects Lord Howe. The locals called them tree lobsters for their impressive size, up to 15 centimeters, and powerful paws. These insects have been considered extinct since 1920. For 70 years, no one has seen a live stick insect. But in 2001, two enthusiastic Australian scientists, David Priddle and Nicholas Carlisle, decided to test the crazy theory. The climbers told the bike that they saw strange huge insects on the neighboring cheese, a completely inaccessible rocky islet of the Pyramid of Ball. Ball's pyramid is just a 500-meter-high spire sticking out of the ocean. There are no trees, no water, no soil, only bare stones, and a single tea tree bush, miraculously caught on a crack in the rock, at an altitude of 100 meters. Scientists landed on the rock at night. They climbed the sheer wall in the dark, risking falling into the ocean. And so, when they got to that very bush, they dedicated flashlights. Silence, pause, blow. They were sitting under the leaves. 24 huge black shiny stick insects, the last on Earth. The entire population of an entire species huddled on one bush in the middle of the ocean. It was an incredible discovery, comparable to finding a living dinosaur. Scientists have realized, one storm, one drought, or one random rat, and the species will disappear forever. There was an urgent need to save the tree lobsters. With the permission of the government, they took only 2 pairs of insects for breeding at the Melbourne Zoo. The rest were left on the rock so as not to risk the entire population. The first pair in captivity died 2 weeks later. The scientists were desperate. The last hope was the second couple, who were named Adam and Eve. Eva was feeling pretty good, laying eggs. But Adam got sick. He stopped eating, became weak, and lay at the bottom of the terrarium, not moving. Zookeeper Patrick Conan understood that if Adam died, Eve would be left alone, and the species was doomed. Patrick spent the night at the zoo. He fed Adam with tweezers with a mixture of nectar and calcium. But the insect was getting worse. It seemed that he had simply lost the will to live. And then a strange thought occurred to Patrick. Stick insects are social creatures. Maybe Adam is just lonely. Eva was busy with eggs and didn't pay attention to him. Patrick put a small mirror in the terrarium. Adam crawled up to the glass, saw his reflection. He wiggled his whiskers. The reflection moved in response. Adam probably decided that there was another male rival in front of him. Or a friend. The insect's eyes, so to speak, lit up. He started to move. He tried to interact with a friend. He got interested. Adam began to eat. He recovered in just a few days. The mirror saved the last male on the planet from depression. Adam and Eve gave offspring. The eggs were incubated under the strictest conditions, and after 6 months, dozens of tiny green lobsters hatched. The breeding program has started working. Today, thousands of descendants of Adam and Eve live in zoos around the world, and are preparing to return to their native island of Lord Howe. As soon as the rats are finally exterminated there, this story is a real miracle. The whole species was saved thanks to one bush on the rock, the dedication of 2 climbers, and a small mirror. That gave hope to a lonely insect. It's amazing how sometimes to save a life, you just need to see someone like yourself, even in a reflection. But it also happens that people create copies, not for salvation, but for deception. And sometimes these copies become so convincing that they begin to live their own lives. Story number 16. The Admiral Who Fought Windmills But Drowned in Shame. Imagine 17th century England, the era of kings, musketeers, and, of course, the navy. British ships ruled the seas. Admirals were national heroes. Their portraits hung in every house. But there was one person whose name causes historians to laugh nervously. Sir Cloud/Oval, a brave sailor, a favorite of Queen Anne, a hero of many battles. He seemed to have no equal in navigation. In October 1707, he led a huge squadron of 21 ships home to England after a successful campaign in the Mediterranean Sea. On board the flagship, the association was in high spirits. The sailors were looking forward to meeting their relatives, beer in pubs, and solid ground under their feet. The weather was turning sour, a thick fog was creeping in, but Sir Cloudesley was sure they were almost home in the Channel. He gathered his navigators for a council. They laid out maps, took out compasses and lots. After much debate, they came to the conclusion. The fleet is at the entrance to the Channel. It's safe, you can go at full speed. Only one person on the ship disagreed, a simple sailor. A local resident of the Isles of Scilly, which, in his opinion, they were passing by now. He knew these waters like the back of his hand. By the smell, by the color of the water, by the cries of the seagulls, he realized that they were not in Lomage. They are flying straight to the Gilstone Rocks. The sailor plucked up the courage and tried to warn the officers. Silence. Pause. A blow. In those days, there was a strict chain of command in the Navy. A simple sailor had no right to tell the admiral. Moreover, navigation was considered the highest art available only to officers. The sailor's audacity was perceived as a riot. According to legend, which however is very similar to the truth, Sir Cloudesley ordered the sailor to be immediately hanged from the yard for spreading panic rumors and undermining discipline. The poor fellow was dangling in the wind while the fleet was confidently heading towards death. A few hours later, in pitch darkness and fog, the flagship association crashed into the Gilstone Rocks with a terrible screech. It was followed by 3 more ships, Eagle, Romney, and Firebrand. It was a disaster. 4 of the best ships of the Royal Navy were blown to pieces in a matter of minutes. About 2,000 sailors died. Admiral Shovel himself, according to one version, drowned along with the ship. According to another, he was washed up on the shore of the Scilly Islands still alive, but a local woman found him there, coveted an emerald ring, and helped him go to the next world. When the fog cleared, it became clear that the fleet had miscalculated by almost 100 miles. It was the biggest navigational error in the history of the British Navy. And all because the admiral did not listen to a simple sailor. But this tragedy had unexpected consequences. The Parliament was in shock. How could this happen? How could the best navigators of the empire have made such a mistake? It turned out that the problem was not in the people but in the tools. Sailors were able to determine latitude by the stars, but with longitude position. East-west was trouble. The clocks on the ships were lost due to pumping and temperature changes. Without an exact time, it is impossible to determine the longitude. It was the death of the Shovel Squadron that forced the British government to announce the famous competition. With a huge prize of £20,000 sterling, millions of modern money, to the one who solves the problem, longitude. This competition was won by a simple carpenter watchmaker, John Garrison, who devoted his whole life to creating a marine chronometer of watches that are not afraid of pitching. His invention saved millions of lives and allowed Britain to become the mistress of the seas. So, the death of one stubborn admiral and 2,000 sailors led to the greatest scientific breakthrough of the century. Sometimes, in order to find the right path, you need to get very lost first. It's amazing how the mistakes of great people change history. But it happens that history is changed not by mistakes, but by random finds of ordinary people. For example, when a farmer finds a stone in his field that turns out to be more expensive than gold. Story number 17. The Golden Boy on the Orange River and the Diamond that Became a Toy. Imagine South Africa in the mid-19th century. Desert plains, rare boar farms, herds of sheep and demons. Life here was hard, harsh, but simple. People dreamed of rain, of a good harvest, but no one thought of riches. In 1866, a 15-year-old boy, Erasmus Jacobs, lived on the De Kock farm near Hoptown. His father was a poor farmer. The mine helped with the housework, and in his spare time, he liked to wander along the dried-up bed of the Orange River. One day, while playing with the neighborhood children, he noticed a strange stone among ordinary pebbles. It was small, about the size of a walnut, but somehow it shone unusually in the sun. Reason lifted him up. The stone was heavy, cold, and surprisingly transparent when viewed in the light. The boy put the find in his pocket. In the evening, he showed the stone to the sisters. The girls were delighted. They called him Pancake, and used the local equivalent of our game of babka to play 5 pebbles. The stone fit perfectly in his hand. It was smooth and beautiful. For several weeks, this cobblestone was lying on the windowsill, served as a paper press, a toy for children, and even a prop for the barn door when a strong wind blew. No one attached any importance to him. But one day a neighbor farmer Jacques van Niekerk stopped by the Jacobses. He saw a stone on the dusty floor, where children were chasing it with sticks. Van Niekerk was a curious man. He took the stone in his hands, twisted it, scratched the window glass with it. The glass cracked with a crunch. "Listen, Jacobs," he said out of superstition, "but it could be something valuable." Jacob the elder laughed. "Come on, Jacques, an ordinary cobblestone. If you want, take it for free." Van Niekerk didn't argue. He took the stone, and took it to the nearest town to show the merchants. They just shrugged their shoulders. Quartz, rock crystal, nothing special. But Jacques was stubborn. He mailed the stone in an ordinary envelope to Dr. Atherstone, the chief mineralogist of the Grahamstown colony. Silence, pause, blow. A few weeks later the answer came. Dr. Atherstone wrote that he almost fell off his chair when he opened the envelope. "Gentlemen," the letter read, "this stone is a diamond weighing 21¼ carats, and it is worth £500 sterling. 500 pounds. It was a fortune for a poor farmer. With this money, you could buy a flock of sheep, a new wagon, and build a house." The news of the discovery spread instantly. The stone was named Eureka. It became the first officially confirmed diamond found in South Africa. At first people didn't believe. Geologists from London turned their noses. "Diamonds can't be in Africa. It's an accident. It was probably defended by an ostrich that swallowed a stone somewhere in India." Well, 2 years later, the same Jacques van Niekerk, who apparently had a nose for treasures, bought another stone. From a local shepherd Gotentot. This time it's huge, weighing 83 carats. The shepherd used it as an amulet against evil spirits. Van Niekerk gave 500 sheep, 10 oxen, and a horse, all his possessions, for him. And he did not lose this stone. Called the Star of South Africa, he sold for £11,000. That's when the real fever started. Thousands of people from all over the world abandoned their homes and rushed to South Africa. They dug up riverbeds, sifted tons of sand. Thus was born the famous Kimberley Hole, the largest mine dug by hand, and the De Beers Company, which controls the global diamond market today. And it all started with the fact that the boy found a beautiful pebble to play with his sisters in the dust. The Eureka stone has traveled the world for a long time. It was shown at the World Exhibition in Paris. Queen Victoria admired him. In 1967, 100 years after the discovery, the De Beers Company bought it at auction and returned it to South Africa. Today it lies in the Kimberley Museum, reminding of how one child's game changed the economy of an entire continent. It's amazing how things that we consider garbage can turn out to be treasures. But sometimes people find not stones, but entire cities buried underground. And they don't need shovels and picks to do that. It's enough just to fall into a hole in your own backyard. We will inevitably talk about one such accidental archaeologist in the next chapter. Story number 18. An underground city found because of a broken wall and curious chickens. Imagine Turkey in 1963, Nevşehir province, Cappadocia, a place where nature fashioned bizarre pillars out of rocks, similar to fairy pipes. In this fabulous land, farmer Amir Demir lived an ordinary man who went about his business and did not think about world fame. One day he decided to expand the basement in his house to store potatoes. Amir took a sledgehammer, hit the wall. The stone gave way, and part of the masonry collapsed, revealing a dark hole. Strange, Amir thought, why is there a void here? He looked inside. There was not just a niche behind the wall, but a room cut out of the rock, dusty, empty, dark. The farmer was surprised, but did not attach much importance to this. He decided to use the new room as a chicken coop, put his chickens there and forgot. But after a couple of days, the chickens began to disappear. They went into this room and didn't come back. Amir heard them, somewhere not far away, as if from under the ground. He decided to figure it out. He took the lantern and climbed into the hole. Silence. Pause. A blow. The light of the lantern picked out of the darkness, not a dead end, but a passage. A narrow tunnel going down. And Mare followed it. The tunnel led to another room, from it to a third, then a staircase down, another floor, and another. Amer walked, and could not believe his eyes. It wasn't a basement, it was a gigantic multi-level underground labyrinth with living quarters, kitchens with traces of soot, cattle stalls, grain warehouses, wine presses, schools, churches, and even cemeteries. Omer returned to the surface, pale as a sheet. He had just found Darankaya, the deepest of the known underground cities of Cappadocia. The archaeologists who were called by the farmer were shocked. They started digging. It turned out that the city goes underground for 85 meters. It's like a 20-story building, only down 18 floors, although only 8 have been excavated so far. Up to 20,000 people could live here at the same time, along with cattle and food supplies. Ventilation shafts 55 meters deep provided fresh air, even to the lowest levels. Wells provided water. Jarnav's huge stone doors weighing half a ton could close the entrances from the inside, turning the city into an impregnable fortress. Who built it? Why? Scientists are still arguing. Perhaps the Phrygians in the 8th century BC, or the first Christians fleeing from the persecution of the Romans, and later from Arab raids. The underground city was ideally suited for a long siege. People could live here for months without coming to the surface. The enemies above could burn, rob, search, but they did not even suspect that the life of an entire metropolis was boiling under their feet. The most amazing thing is that Derinkuyu is connected by tunnels to other underground cities, and more than 200 of them have been found in Cappadocia. One such tunnel stretches for 8 kilometers to the city of Kaymakli. Imagine an ancient underground subway. Amer Demir became a celebrity. His house turned into a museum. Tourists from all over the world come to descend into the cool depths and imagine how people lived here thousands of years ago, hiding from wars and adversity. And it all started with the fact that one Turkish farmer just wanted more space for potatoes and lost his chickens. It's amazing how the past literally lies under our feet, waiting for one blow. But sometimes secrets are hidden not in the depths of the earth, but in the depths of the ocean. And you don't need shovels to open them. All you need is incredible luck and a piece of whale burp. Story number 19. How one boy snatched a city from the clutches of death by simply pressing a button. Imagine a world without the internet, without mobile phones, without real-time news. 1938. All of America clung to the radios. Sunday evening, October 30th. Halloween Eve. It's time for horror stories and practical jokes. In the CBS studio, a young ambitious director, Orson Welles, the same one who will then shoot Citizen Kane, is preparing for the broadcast. He decided to stage a radio play based on H.G. Wells' novel The War of the Worlds. But he did not just plan to read a book on roles. Orson wanted to make the show realistic, scary. The performance began as a regular musical program. The orchestra was playing dance tunes. Suddenly the music stopped. The announcer's voice, anxious and serious, announced, "Urgent news. Astronomers have noticed strange flashes on Mars." The music continued, but after a couple of minutes, there was another interruption. Attention! An unidentified object fell on a farm in Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Wells was a genius of suspense. He escalated the situation masterfully. A reporter from the scene, a voice breaking, the shouts of the crowd, the sounds of sirens, the crackle of static. It opens. My God, something is coming out of the cylinder, tentacles, a heat ray. Silence. Pause. A blow. And then something happened that no one expected. America believed. People who did not turn on the radio from the very beginning and missed the introduction that this was a performance fell into a panic. A real animal panic. The phone lines in New Jersey and New York were white hot. People called the police, the newspapers, the hospital. The Martians have landed, they are burning everything around. What should we do? In Groversmill, in a quiet town where the aliens landed according to the scenario, the locals grabbed weapons and ran to the water tower, mistaking it for a Martian tripod in the dark. They shot at it until the water poured out of the holes. The rumors snowballed. Someone swore that he saw smoke over New York. Someone smelled poisonous gas. Families loaded things into cars, wrapped their heads with wet towels from the gas, and raced away from the cities, creating traffic jams. Prayer services were held in churches for the salvation of the soul before the end of the world. In the CBS studio, the actors continued to play, not even suspecting what was going on behind the walls. They depicted the death of the US Army, the fall of New York, the despair of the last survivor. It was only when the police burst into the studio that Wells realized what he had done. He interrupted the broadcast and announced in a trembling voice, "Ladies and gentlemen, it was just a Halloween joke. We didn't want to scare anyone. But it was too late." Millions of people, according to sociologists, about 1 million Americans believed in the reality of the invasion, experienced the most terrible hour in their lives. The scandal was huge. The newspapers were screaming, "The radio is lying." Panic gripped the nation. Orson Welles gave a press conference the next day, looking like a scared schoolboy who was caught red-handed. He apologized, swore that he meant no harm, but deep down he was elated. It was his triumph. He proved the power of art and the power of media. He showed how easy it is to manipulate the consciousness of the masses if you make a lie convincing enough. This story has become a legend. She entered the textbooks of psychology and journalism. In Grover's Mill, they even erected a monument to the landing site of the Martians, although in fact nothing fell there. And Orson Welles, his career skyrocketed. Hollywood opened the doors for him. He became a great director, but for the rest of his life, he was haunted by this ghost of the Martian invasion. People came up to him on the street and said, "Mr. Welles, I was the guy who shot at the water tower. You owe me for the bullets." It's amazing how a fictional story can become more real than life itself. But sometimes reality throws us plots that are impossible to believe, even if you see them with your own eyes. For example, when an entire island disappears from the world map, and then appears again, but in a different place. We will talk about one such geographical riddle that has tormented sailors for centuries in the next chapter. Story number 20. A nuclear reactor built by nature itself 2 billion years ago. Listen, we used to consider ourselves the crown of creation. We think that the most sophisticated technologies are exclusively the fruit of our high intelligence and achievements of the last decades, well, maybe centuries. We are proud to have conquered the atom, learned how to control the decay energy, and built giant power plants. But to be honest, nature is a very ironic engineer. And she did all this long before the first man appeared on the planet. Imagine, 2 billion years before us. It all started in the spring of 1972 in France at a conventional nuclear fuel enrichment plant. In the town of Purelad, a normal working day. An analyst in the laboratory conducts a routine mass spectrometric analysis of a sample of uranium ore. The ore came from Africa, from distant Gabon, from a mine called Oklo. It was standard procedure. All scientists in the world know that the content of the uranium-235 isotope anywhere on Earth, on the Moon, and even in meteorites is exactly the same 0.702%. This is the same constant as the speed of light, an unchanging figure, silence, pause, blow. The analyst looked at the figures in the report. His instruments showed 0.7171%. The difference was tiny, literally a few decimal places. But for a nuclear physicist, it was like discovering in the morning that the sun had risen in the west. It just couldn't be. At first, we decided that this was a mistake. We checked the instruments and settings. Refailure? The numbers didn't change. Then there was a terrible theft. Government agents were alarmed. Someone steals a valuable isotope directly from the raw material. It smelled like an international scandal and secret operations. An investigation has begun. Scientists traced the entire path of ore from a mine in Gabon to a factory. They checked every crate, every conveyor belt, and eventually they went back to where it all started in the Oklo mine. Although no, wait, everything was much bigger than just a shortage. When physicists descended into the quarry, they discovered something completely impossible. In the layers of uranium ore, they found the decay products of exactly those chemical elements that remain in the core of a modern nuclear reactor after its completion. It was crazy. The conclusion was obvious. In this mine, right in the rock, 2 billion years ago, there was a controlled nuclear process. Nature has created ideal conditions. Billions of years ago, the concentration of uranium was higher. At some point, ordinary fresh water got into the Truda formation. In nuclear physics, water serves as a neutron moderator. Without it, the chain reaction will not begin. And everything started spinning. 2 billion years ago, a natural reactor started operating in Oklo. He warmed the water, turned it into steam, gave out huge power. When there was too little water, the reaction faded. I went a couple of times. The rocks cooled down, the water seeped in again, and the reactor started up again. This pulsating cycle lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. Nature managed to do what Enrico Fermi and his team had so hard to implement in Chicago, only in 1942. Only nature has done this without control buttons, without sensors, and without computer programs. But that's not the most amazing thing. Scientists were amazed at how nature solved the problem of radioactive waste. Today, we are spending billions, building protective containers, looking for burial sites that will last at least 100 years. And nature? She just left everything in place. It turned out that the structure of the rocks in Okla was so perfect that the decay products did not move a single centimeter in 2 billion years. They were just sleeping peacefully in their stone bed. This discovery has completely changed our understanding of how the planet works. We realize that the world is a much more complex and living laboratory than we dared to imagine. Amazing, isn't it? We build the most complex machines, but it turns out that nature has long invented all this, used it, and forgot. But sometimes human curiosity makes us look for evidence that we are not alone in the universe. And then we create messages that fly through eternity. However, sometimes we find the most important message right under our feet, encrypted in an ordinary old stone. Story number 21. A ghost ship in the hills of Suffolk, which has been waiting in the wings for 13 centuries. Imagine England in the late 30s of the last century. County of Suffolk, Saddamhu Estate. A thick heavy fog hangs over the fields. The air smells of rain and damp earth. The world froze in anxious expectation. In Europe, there is already a smell of a big thunderstorm, the one that will later be called World War II. But here in the English wilderness, time seemed to have stopped. Edith Pretty, the owner of the estate, was an amazing woman. A widow whose husband left too soon. She lived in a big house with a young son. But to be honest, her heart has always been drawn to the secrets hidden underground. There were several strange mounds on her estate. Locals said that strange lights and figures in ancient armor were seen there at night. Many would have just shrugged it off, but Edith believed in her intuition. In 1938, she invites a self-taught archaeologist named Basil Brown. Basil was not an armchair scientist. He was a man of the earth. He knew what antiquity smelled like. Edith pointed to the largest hill. "Start here, Basil," she said. Silence, pause, blow. Basil started digging. At first, nothing, emptiness, clay. But in May 1939, his shovel clattered on metal. But it wasn't a treasure, it was a rusty iron rivet. Basil froze. He began to clear the ground not with a shovel, but with a small brush millimeter by millimeter. And then something completely unthinkable opened up in front of him. It was a ship, a huge warship with a length of 27 meters. Although no, wait, it was much more complicated. The tree has rotted completely. For 13 centuries, the moist soil of England has not left even a chip of oak planks, but a ghost has remained. The iron rivets were held in place, and the sand that filled the hull absorbed the shape of every board, every detail of the skin. In the mound lay a perfect detailed print of a ship made of gray sand. But what's inside? Basil and Edith continued to work under the scorching sun and torrential rain, and in the very center of the ship, they found a burial chamber. And that's when the world of archaeology shuddered. Gold? Incredible, shining gold is everywhere. They found a golden helmet decorated with images of dancing warriors. A gold belt buckle weighing almost half a kilogram, covered with such intricate carvings that modern jewelers would need microscopes to repeat it. Silver bowls brought from distant Byzantium. Rubies mined in the mountains of India. A sword with a hilt made of gold. It was the grave of the king, the great Anglo-Saxon leader of the 7th century. Historians used to think that these were the dark times of the savages, but Satan who proved that it was an incredible era. Wealth, culture, and connections with the whole world. Edith Pretty suddenly found herself the owner of treasures whose value could not even be imagined. According to the laws of England at that time, everything found in the ground belonged to the owner of the land. She could sell those gold buckles and helmets and become the richest woman in the world. But Edith did something else. In August 1939, when the war was only a few days away, she announced, "I am donating all of this to the people of England for free." She wanted people to remember their greatness even in the darkest times. The treasures were packed in a box and secretly transported to London, where they hid in the deep tunnels of the subway during the bombing. Only 9 years after the end of the war, the world was able to see them. Amazing, isn't it? Sometimes you just need to believe your hunch and start digging, where everyone sees only an ordinary hill. And sometimes the greatest value is not gold and the nobility of the soul, which allows you to give this gold to the whole world. But Satan, who is a story about how we find the past, and it happens that the past itself finds us in the most unexpected forms. For example, through a forgotten musical instrument that stores the voices of those who have been gone for a long time. We will talk about such an incredible find in the next chapter. Story number 22. The Ice Maiden from Ant, and a message frozen in time for 500 years. Imagine the peak of the Amparo volcano in Peru. The altitude is 6,300 meters above sea level. The air here is so thin that every breath burns the lungs, and the cold penetrates to the very bones. This is the place where the earth ends and the sky begins. In September 1995, archaeologist Johann Reinhardt and his partner Miguel Sarabia made an ascent to this peak. They weren't looking for treasure. They were just studying the traces of ancient Inca rituals. But something unexpected happened. The nearby Sabancaya volcano has woken up and started spewing ash clouds. This hot ash settled on the eternal snow of Amparo, and the glacier began to melt. Johann was walking along the edge of the crater when his gaze caught on a strange bundle. So in the crevice of the rock, he came closer. A human face peeked out from under the melting ice. Silence, pause, blow. It was a girl. She was sitting in the fetal position, wrapped in the best fabrics of her era. Her skin was pale, almost transparent, and her hair was thick and black, as if she had fallen asleep only yesterday. She lay in ice captivity for 500 years. Scientists named her Juanita, but the world recognized her as the Ice Maiden of the Incas. Although no, wait, the most striking thing was not how good it was. It has been preserved. The most incredible thing was in the details. Juanita was part of the Kepacocha ritual. The Incas believed that mountains were living gods, masters of water and weather. When there was a terrible drought or a volcanic eruption, they brought the most valuable gifts of the best children of the empire. The girl was about 14 years old. According to DNA and tissue tests, she ate like a princess for the last months of her life. Selected corn, meat, llamas. She was led from the capital of the peace on a long pilgrimage to the top of the mountain. It was a path hundreds of kilometers long. She wasn't scared, at least that's what scientists say. Traces of coca leaves and alcohol from corn, chichi, were found in her blood. She was in a state of deep trance. At the top of the mountain, she was simply left sitting in a crevice. The cold did the rest. She fell asleep and turned into ice, becoming the eternal messenger of her people to the gods. Tiny golden statues of llamas, delicate clay vessels, and even bags of food for the road to the spirit world were found with her in the icy grave. It was all in such perfect condition, as if it had just come out of the workshop. For archaeologists, Juanita has become a real portal to the past. Thanks to her, we learned what the Incas ate, what clothes they wore, how they wove their incredible patterns. We were even able to reconstruct her face. She was very beautiful. Johann Reinhardt admitted later that when he first saw her in the glacier, he took his breath away. It wasn't like meeting a mummy. It was a meeting with a man. Today, Juanita rests in a special chamber with a constant temperature in the museum of the city of Arequipa. Thousands of people come to see it. And do you know how they feel? Not fear, but rather awe. This is a story about how ice can stop time and preserve the beauty and tragedy of the past for a century. Juanita reminds us of what people were willing to do for the sake of believing in harmony with nature. Amazing, isn't it? Mountains keep their secrets for centuries, and then suddenly give them to us. But sometimes nature does not create ice statues, but living masterpieces that can deceive our senses and make us believe in magic, where there is only cunning biology. Story number 23. Cubist Armada. Or how artists deceive the horizon. Look, we used to think that disguise is an attempt to become invisible. You know, merge with the foliage, put on a spotted uniform, or pretend to be a ditch. It's logical, it's understandable. But there was an era in history when everything worked exactly the opposite. Imagine ships that were not hiding, but on the contrary shouted about their presence, while looking like a mad dream of a cubist artist. The Atlantic. 1917. The ocean at that time was an extremely uncomfortable place. There was the First World War, and the main threat was not huge battleships, but the rest of the wolf submarines. They scoured under the water, exposing only a thin periscope tube. The submarine commander did not need to see the ship clearly. He needed only three things: which way the ship was going, at what speed, and at what distance it was. Mathematics is pure calculation, anticipation. The torpedo went, And in a minute, a merchant ship carrying grain or medicines goes to the bottom. The traditional gray camouflage didn't help. Against the changing sky and steely water, the ship was still visible as a clear black silhouette. Scientists and admirals were at an impasse. Silence, pause, blow. And then a man named Norman Wilkinson comes on the scene. He was not a physicist, he was not a military cadre, he was a marine painter and a naval reserve officer. You know, he once told his superiors, "We will never be able to make a huge steel steamer invisible at sea. It's impossible. But we can make it so that they don't understand what exactly they see." Wilkinson's idea was overwhelming. Instead of trying to hide the ship, he suggested painting it in such a way as to break its shape, cut the silhouette into pieces. He called it blinding camouflage. Imagine a huge transport ship coming into dock. And instead of gray paint, a wild mixture of sharp stripes, rhombuses, triangles, and curved lines is applied to it. Black, white, bright blue, dazzling yellow. It looked as if a gang of crazy painters had walked on board the ship, having had too much absinthe. But there was a strict calculation in this madness. When the German submarine commander looked into the eyepiece of the periscope, his brain just exploded. The geometry of the drawing was chosen so that it seemed as if the bow of the ship was located where the stern actually is. The stripes broke the perspective, and it was completely impossible to understand whether the ship was coming towards you or going away. One day, a British captain, looking at his own ship, painted according to the Wilkinson method, honestly admitted, "Look, I'm standing half a mile away from him, and I'm still not sure which way he's moving." Honestly, it was brilliant. Art went on the warpath to save lives. In London and New York, they created entire dazzling studios. The artists drew models on tiny wooden models, placed them on rotating tables, and looked through periscopes in specially lit rooms. If the form broke, the drawing was approved. By the end of the war, more than 4,000 British ships had become floating galleries. Contemporary art, it was an armada of cubists. Did it help? Well, statistics say that such ships were much less likely to fall under the sight of torpedoes. Not because they were not seen, but because they simply could not be aimed at correctly. Errors in the calculations of the torpedo attack increased several times. After the war, of course, radar replaced the colors, and there was no need for such zebras. The ships became boring and gray again. But this era has remained in history as a moment when the imagination and courage of the artist turned out to be stronger than the most advanced military equipment. Amazing, isn't it? Sometimes, in order to survive, you do not need to hide in the shadows, but become so strange and incomprehensible that the world simply could not find the key to you. But the art of disguise and deception is only part of human stubbornness. Sometimes our desire to declare ourselves and leave a mark on history makes us do things that seem crazy to contemporaries, but become a legend for posterity. Story number 24, Piano in the Icy Desert, or How Music Defeated the Law of Attraction. Imagine Antarctica in 1910, the coldest, most hostile place on Earth, the edge of the world, where a person is just a random squeak in a whirlwind of snow and ice. At this time, the great and tragic drama of the race for the South Pole is unfolding here. Captain Robert Scott and his team are preparing for a decisive throw deep into the continent. Their base at Cape Evans is a wooden house covered in snow, where 25 men have to spend a long polar night. Inside, the smell of kerosene, wet wool and tobacco. Outside, it's freezing 50 degrees, and a hurricane-force wind that shudders the walls. It would seem that in such conditions, it is necessary to think only about survival, about the reserves of pemmican, about kerosene, about the serviceability of the sled. But Robert Scott was a true Englishman. He believed that even at the end of the world, a person should remain a person. He needs culture, he needs beauty, he needs comfort. And so, among the bales of food, boxes of scientific instruments and bags of food for ponies, something completely ridiculous piano was unloaded on the coast of Antarctica. Yes, a real massive piano, in an oak case. It was a gift from one of the sponsors of the expedition. A musical instrument has traveled thousands of miles across a raging ocean to find itself in the most silent place on the planet. Silence, pause, blow. 25 sailors and scientists, grunting and swearing, dragged this heavy box across the ice. They dragged it into the house, installed it in a corner, and removed the lid. The keys were as cold as ice, the strings rang with frost. But when one of the participants of the expedition, the Dr. Edward Wilson, sat down at the instrument and pressed the first key, everything changed. The sound of a piano in Antarctica was something surreal. It cut through the howl in the south, it warmed better than hot tea. Men, overgrown with beards and ragged clothes, froze, listening to Mozart or Mary Cabot's. The piano became the heart of their little world. It reminded them of home, of London theaters, of wives and brides left overseas. But there was one problem. There are no piano tuners in Antarctica at all. From the wild cold and dry air, the tree began to crack. The strings snapped one after another with a sharp sound like a shot. By the end of winter, the instrument had become so upset that it was almost impossible to play it. It made strange rattling sounds, more like the grinding of ice. Although no, wait, the music hasn't stopped. The participants of the expedition showed ingenuity. They used wires from scientific instruments to replace the broken strings. They put chunks of seal oil under the piano legs to level it on the sagging floor. And the piano continued to sound. When Scott and his 4 companions went to the pole, they left, never to return. Those who stayed at the base continued to play. Music helped them not to go crazy with uncertainty and grief. Decades later, when other expeditions visited Miss Evans, they found this house. It was perfectly preserved in the icy air, and there was still that piano in the corner. His keys were covered with glue. If you click on them today, they still make a sound. Quiet, rattling, ghostly. This is a story about the fact that a person needs not only warmth for the body, but also food for the soul. Even if this food weighs 300 kg and needs to be dragged through an icy hell, it's amazing how music is able to survive, where everything else is dying. But sometimes people create instruments not for music, but in order to see what is hidden from all eyes. And these tools open up worlds that we didn't even know existed. We will talk about how an ordinary piece of glass allowed a person to look into the past for billions of years in the next chapter.